at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we're all mortal. And he called then for an end to the arms race and to the nuclear testing and to an arms treaty. And some of these things led then to legislation that started before he died. And now we live in a world where we've gone the other direction, where these treaties are now broken, and the hopes for a peace, even though the Soviet Union, the enemy then, is gone, new enemies have been created, and the stockpiles have grown over those years, and the permanent war economy has grown, and we have a larger military budget now than largest increase under Bush in recent history since Reagan, and it still dominates the possibility, as he says, to spend the money on something else, on human needs, or to meet world needs, and instead the stockpiling and distribution of arms and warfare continue apace. And so these priorities that he tried to establish ended in large part with his death. The Vietnam War policy that he had to withdraw from Vietnam was reversed as soon as he was dead, and took us into that debacle for 10 years and all the cost of it. And it continued to grow to the point that our military stockpile has no equal in the world. Even if you go to the next 6 or 7 largest countries and put them together, they still don't come to military compilation of the United States. And now Bush has openly declared a Pax Americana, which he said he didn't want. That was the fight just before September 11th. In August, the Washington Post said that the Pentagon was fighting the Bush administration over this idea that the Bush people said, we're an empire, we better admit it, get about it, establish a Pax Americana, and the people in the Pentagon at that time said, no, we have enough to do. So there was a chance, and people saw the hope in the Kennedys because they responded. Of course, this was itself a response to international movements for nuclear disarmament at that time, and for an end to the arms race and attempts at détente. Kennedy was also reaching out behind channels to normalize relations with Castro. But all these things, ending the Vietnam War, normalizing relations, striving for détente, cutting back on the nuclear arms, were in direct opposition to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA and the people around him who had tried to push him into nuclear war at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he and his brother were alone in the room, just about in the opinion that nuclear war was not called for. And they hadn't been happy with his pullback on the Bay of Pigs and his refusal to put in American troops, which they tried to trick him into doing, to overthrow Castro, and his eventual disaffection with the covert operations that Lansdale and the others had handed him when he came into office as a solution. He began to see that the CIA and these agencies were lying to him, and he began to buck all of them and went against their interests. And so as soon as he was dead, those policies were reversed. And Brown and Root, a huge company in Texas run by George Brown, who financed LBJ into political office and into the presidency, made $3 to $4 billion on the construction of Cam Ranh Bay and in Vietnam. And now today, Brown and Root is a subsidiary of Halliburton, which is making even more billions of dollars on the current Gulf War and post-war construction plans. So this military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about when he left office and Kennedy came in, slapped Kennedy in the face and hasn't been diminished since. And Penn Jones, a friend of mine for many years and one of the early Kennedy researchers, used to say in his lectures that we have been in the death grip of the military-industrial complex since November 22nd, 1963. And then he would say, now let's all pray I'm wrong. This turn of Kennedy was no secret. There's been an attempt in the press to say that it was otherwise, but all of the historical evidence that continues to come out, release of National Security Memoranda 263, recent books on Kennedy, Howard Jones's book Death of a Generation, Dalek's new book on Kennedy, further document that he was pulling out of Vietnam. But for many, many years they tried to deny it and bury it, and his aides know it. Pierre Salinger said, "I don't know why it's even a debate." He asked me to announce it from the steps of the White House. And other aides have been quoted saying that they knew that he was planning to pull out. And my mother, who has worked at the Pentagon 5 levels above top security and determined the draft calls for the Joint Chiefs, I asked her after she retired, when did they tell you that they would escalate the war in Vietnam? And she told me that in April of 1963, on orders from the White House, which means Kennedy, for the first time in her career of projecting the draft call accurately 5 years in advance, that she was told to reverse her figures. And they were in relation to Vietnam, and that she was to put in figures that reflected a full American withdrawal from Vietnam by the end of 1964 following the election. And that was then reversed on November 25th, 1963, as soon as Kennedy was in the grave. They gave her figures that she at first couldn't believe and took back to the Joint Chiefs to go into a 10-year war with 57,000 American dead on November 25th, 63, right after Kennedy was killed. So the reversal was complete and has been going on since, and not much of anybody in the White House has been able to stop it. Clinton bucked it a little bit and got his messages, and the rest of the people who have been in the White House have pretty much just been in lockstep with it. But it's, I believe, at a crossroads now. I mean, Kennedy, I think, is very prescient in this speech and talks to it at a point when it had more chance of reversal than it does now. But I think now it's so far along that really the history of humanity is now either going to go down this nightmare path of war and genocide and death that's being pushed by the forces that are in the White House, or people are going to create real democracy and turn the reality of a surplus economy into a world where justice and real peace could be restored and realized. Because we have the potential to do it. We have the resources to do it. There's no need for anybody now to starve or be without housing or transportation or communication or anything else. We have the resources. We have a surplus. The surplus is hoarded into the hands of a few, then it will never be realized as anything except, as Kennedy once said, if you make peaceful revolution impossible, then you make violent revolution inevitable. But even revolution in this time with violence will not substantially, I believe, change the course of this history. It will just give reaction its excuse. And Mussolini defined fascism as corporatism plus reaction. And a situation where the corporations become the state, and the technical capability of death that this juggernaut has puts the Nazi Hohenzollern machine to shame. So unless we make it a democracy and people really decide what way it will go, and we use the resources we have for human ends, then I believe we're turning instead on a path toward genocide, an end to democracy, not only here but all over the world. And what's being exported in the name of democracy in these countries has nothing to do with real democracy. It has to do with market penetration and grabs for resources and cheap labor and a facade of choosing the leadership, as we have always done, having learned from the British how to set up empire. But America, in its best dreams, is not about empire. It's about something else, about realizing the possibility that Jefferson and the early founders saw of coming out from under the empire, from the colonial rule, and creating a just and equitable society in which the people themselves have the power. And all generations are limited in their vision of that. These were slaveholders. These were the ruling class, so to speak, of their day, the well-to-do and the landed gentry, and they protected their interests as a group. But at the same time, Jefferson and a few of them, Tom Paine and Sam Adams, had a vision that went beyond that and that would be inclusive over time for all people, and should be. And democracy has its technology now, much more so than in the 17th century, to be fully realized. If that's what we want to do. But we come out every year to commemorate this speech because it's so telling and unfortunately so little known. And it reminds me of the 25 years or so before the Oliver Stone film that I would stand with this many people or fewer out on the grassy knoll on November 22nd and have a moment of silence with Penn Jones and the few people that would come out. And sad that even the students, of course, they're not here. It's the summer, but they don't, as far as I know, recognize the plaque or do anything in relation to it. I don't even know if it got mentioned when Sorensen came. I hope it did. But it's not much remembered, but I think a speech that resonates right to the current day and to the problems that we face. And he tried to take a turn and ended up dead, I believe, because of that turn that he was making, because it didn't represent the moneyed interests and the power interests that were around him and that he was fighting.